Welcome to The Explainer, where we're going to unpack how the super mundane routines of your everyday life, things like scrolling through your phone, pushing a cart through a supermarket, or grabbing a bite at McDonald's, are actually the focus of a massive, politically engaged academic field. Today, we're diving headfirst into cultural studies. It's this fascinating lens that takes the things we usually totally ignore and puts them right under a microscope.
Okay, let's start by just throwing out that old, stuffy, elitist definition of culture. You know the one, the idea that culture only means the quote-unquote best or most sophisticated artistic works of a civilization. Things like fine art, classical music, and super dense literature. Instead, cultural studies radically reframes everything by looking at ordinary, everyday, so-called low cultural practices. Watching YouTube, browsing the aisles of a supermarket, eating fast food, all of these are considered absolutely vital cultural acts that are worthy of serious scholarly consideration.
Section 1. Redefining culture. A new perspective.
So we are completely changing the lens here. The crucial takeaway is that culture isn't just something you go to a fancy museum to see. Culture is a whole, integrated way of life. Those seemingly trivial, everyday routines you do on autopilot are just as vital to study as spectacular global events. Take a really simple action, like buying a specific brand of coffee on your morning commute. Cultural studies tells us that this isn't just a basic transaction for caffeine. No way. The aesthetic of the cup you carry, the specific language you use to order the drink, the social signaling of the brand, and the massive global supply chain that brought those beans to your city, all of that connects you to an interconnected web of class identity and global economics. Every piece of media you casually engage with and every choice you make as a consumer defines exactly how we live and interact with society.
Section 2. Birth of the field. Cultural studies.
To really figure out how we got here, we got to go back a bit. Following the post-war capitalist boom, mass production led to a total flood of cheaper goods across society. We're talking cars, clothing, washing machines, televisions. Coupled with full employment, higher wages, and way more leisure time, Western society radically transformed from a demographic of traditional producers into a massive demographic of consumers. This explosion of mass media and shopping fundamentally altered the rhythm of daily life. So, in 1964, Richard Hoggart founded the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies at the University of Birmingham to study this exact shift. Now, at the time, traditional academia pushed back hard against this. A lot of scholars basically scoffed at the notion. I mean, why study comic books, pop music, or TV ads when you could study Shakespeare, right? But Hoggart, and later the brilliant Jamaican-born sociologist Stuart Hall, who took over in 1968, understood that mass culture is where the people actually live. Hall realized that to understand modern society, you literally had to study the media that everyday people were actually consuming.
And this new field wasn't just some rigid, boring subject. It was intensely interdisciplinary. Actually, scratch that, it was sometimes even proudly anti-disciplinary. What that means is these scholars refused to stay safely in the traditional lanes of just sociology, or just anthropology, or just literature. If they needed political science to explain the impact of a popular song, they used it. If they needed economics to understand a new fashion trend, they pulled it right in. By breaking down those rigid academic walls, the field was able to tackle the messy, eclectic reality of lived experience. The objects of interest are constantly shifting, sure, but the core focus remains exactly the same. Examining how ordinary people construct their everyday lives, and how those everyday practices relate to much wider, overarching systems of power.
Moving on to Section 3. Decoding media. What we consume.
Stuart Hall's work on representation is a real game changer for how we view media. He basically proves that the things you see on TV or online aren't just transparent reflections of reality. Instead, they are carefully constructed messages. They're encoded by creators using very specific cultural codes, conventions, and discourses. But the process doesn't stop there. As an audience member, you are definitely not just a passive sponge. You actively decode these messages, interpreting and making your own meaning from these cultural texts based entirely on your own lived experience. Think about a national news broadcast covering a major labor strike. The network might encode the broadcast, framing the strikers as disruptive to the economy, maybe focusing heavily on traffic delays. But a viewer watching from home who comes from a working-class union family, they might decode that exact same broadcast completely differently, reading the strikers not as a nuisance, but as heroes fighting for fair wages. The meaning is negotiated right there, between the screen and the viewer.
However, because these representations are constructed through such specific cultural codes, the field points out that they often have a much darker side, reinforcing dominant ideologies. Media, Literature and popular culture frequently depict racialized groups in super narrow and stereotypical ways. Just think about the historical tropes found in classic Hollywood cinema, where minority characters were routinely relegated to subservient sidekicks or framed as dangerous outsiders. Guys, this isn't just harmless passive entertainment. Over decades, these repetitive tropes encode an ideology of racial hierarchy right into the public consciousness. These representations shape how individuals perceive themselves and others, leading to severe, real-world consequences like racial prejudice, discrimination, and the justification of systemic inequality.
Section 4. Gender performativity. Beyond the binary.
So is identity fixed and natural? We are so often taught that identity, especially when it comes to gender, is an essential, natural, and fixed biological reality. But cultural studies asks us to look a little closer at the systems of power that might be shaping those underlying assumptions.
The research here reveals that the media and cultural texts surrounding us are constantly hammering home strict gender binaries. Through a really complex interplay of norms and expectations, our culture prescribes very specific behaviors and attributes as definitively masculine or feminine. You can see this vividly in everyday media. Just look at the sharp contrast in children's toy commercials, or action movies that feature a rugged, totally emotionally detached male hero alongside a passive, highly emotional female character. These aren't just fictional stories. They actively constrain individual self-expression. They draw strict boundaries around who we are allowed to be, and they perpetuate historical power dynamics and discrimination against anyone who doesn't neatly fit within those prescribed boxes.
Enter philosopher Judith Butler. She challenges this whole notion of fixed identity with her groundbreaking theory of gender performativity. Butler argues that gender is absolutely not a natural internal reality that you are simply born with. Instead, gender is a fluid, social construct. It's something you actively do. It's enacted through repeated, stylized behaviors over time. It's the way you walk, the way you cross your legs, the pitch of your voice, or the specific clothes you choose to put on every single morning. Through these continuous, repetitive actions, we create the powerful illusion of an essential biological core. Cultural norms heavily regulate these performances, keeping existing power dynamics firmly in place by making these constructed identities feel completely natural, inevitable, and essential.
Section 5. The battleground. Ideological struggles. Let's zoom out, because the stakes of everything we've just uncovered are massive. This powerful quote from Stuart Hall emphasizes exactly why this analysis is so crucial. He says, "The popular arts are directly relevant to the imaginative resistances of the people who have to live within capitalism." Cultural studies teaches us that popular culture isn't just cheap, throwaway entertainment. When a marginalized community creates a viral social media dance, or reclaims a specific fashion trend, or even alters the way they interact with a global fast food chain, they are engaging in a form of imaginative resistance. They're actively carving out space, identity, and agency within a massive capitalist machine that often ignores or exploits them. The popular is an ideological battleground. It is the exact site where society's deep needs, growing social discontents, and power struggles are fiercely negotiated every single day.
Ultimately, cultural studies treats culture not as a stable, bounded entity that you can just safely lock away in a glass display case. It's a constantly shifting, living landscape. It's an endless series of interacting and changing practices, and every single one of those practices is deeply bound up with systems of power and control. Whether researchers are looking at the subtle ideologies hidden in our media, the structures of class, the dynamics of ethnicity, the divides between generations, or the performative nature of gender, they are always seeking to understand how meaning is generated, disseminated, and fiercely contested in the modern world. So, the next time you're just killing time scrolling through social media, watching a seemingly mindless reality show, or even just walking the aisles of your local supermarket, let this explainer linger in the back of your mind. Stop for a second, look at the representations and codes all around you, and ask yourself this final question. What is your everyday life secretly telling you?